My name is Ed Bottomley. I'm from the Michigan Medicine Department of Communication. Just to reiterate, we are doing a live stream today from flu to COVID-19, everything you need to know about vaccines. If you're wondering about our setup here, obviously, out of respect for social distancing, this live stream is being done remotely. And I believe we had a little bit of a sound hiccup a few moments earlier, so pardon any further technical interruptions. I'm joined today by our expert, Dr. Pamela Rockell, Associate Professor in the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Michigan Medical School, and a Fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians, AAFP. Nationally, she is the AAFP liaison to the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC. She is the chair of the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine group on immunization education, and also co-chair of the Immunization Committee at Michigan Medicine. She has published a text titled Vaccine Science and Immunization Guideline, a practical guide for primary care, and she writes often in medical journals on ways to improve vaccination rates. Before we jump to Dr. Rockell and get our questions to her, just a few housekeeping items. You can submit questions at any time, even now, for Dr. Rockell to answer during the Q&A portion of today's chat. Questions can be submitted by commenting on this video, but please note that your name or your profile name will be visible to others participating. If you prefer a more anonymous option, you can send us a private message, or you can email us at ask-mishmed@med.umich.edu. That's ask-mishmed@med.umich.edu. If you can't stay for the whole chat, or you want to share the recording with a friend, a video of the chat in its entirety will be available on our Michigan Medicine, University of Michigan, and Mott Facebook pages, our UMich Medicine Twitter account, and the Michigan Medicine YouTube channel. So, next up, let's move on to our questions with our expert, Dr. Rockell. Hi, Dr. Rockell. How are you today?
Hi, Ed. I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent. I'm good too. Let's jump in with some of our questions. The first question that I see coming up, will a vaccine for COVID-19 mean we can go back to normal?
Yes, that is the intention, but unfortunately that will take some time for normal, even with a vaccine. Experts predict it'll take at least 70%, if not more, folks in the US to have immunity to COVID-19 before we can sort of go about our business without thinking about washing our hands all the time. Good practice anyway, but washing our hands all the time and not touching our face and wearing masks and practicing social distancing. So eventually, yes, COVID-19 vaccine will allow us to resume life as we used to know it.
Thank you for that. That was a big question to get out of the way straight off the bat. The next question that we have up for you, nice broad one, big one too. How do vaccines work?
Well, I try to explain it to my patients, how they work, because I think there's a false information that people think vaccines work by actually giving you a sickness and that your body somehow mounts a response, but that is not the case. So vaccines work by stimulating the immune system, pretty much by tricking the body into thinking you've been exposed to a particular germ, whether it's a virus or bacteria, depending on the vaccine. And then your body mounts an immune response, and that stays in your body. Depending on the disease we're trying to prevent, depending on the type of vaccine, you might need a booster shot later to keep that immunity up. But the goal is for your body to get an immune response that will get activated in the future if you were to then get exposed to that germ, that infection.
Thank you for that. The next question that we have up, how safe are vaccines?
Yes, big concern always. Vaccines are very safe and have actually never been safer. They are vetted very well before they ever go out to the public. And so many studies now have shown the safety, and no correlation to autism and no correlation to sudden infant death and things like that. But they're very safe. Yes, there might be some mild side effects to a vaccine as your immune system gets stimulated. You know, you're going to get a sore arm for where you get the immunization. You might get a little low-grade fever, headache, things like that. But the chance of a serious adverse reaction is so small compared to the risk you take by getting exposed to a vaccine preventable disease. It's really not an issue that we're concerned about in the medical community.
Thank you for highlighting that, especially the risk of a vaccine compared to the risk of not having it. That's very important, I think, too. We've got another safety question coming in. Aren't I risking my kids' health or my health by going to a clinic for vaccines during a pandemic?
Of course, this is on people's mind, especially as we went to total shutdown. We saw national vaccine rates fall across the country. Now that we're, different states are in different forms of opening, but our primary goal now is to catch those children, adolescents, and adults, catch them up on those vaccines they're delayed or late on, and get everybody vaccinated, because we're all following CDC guidelines on how to do this in the safest manner possible. That means all of our offices, public health areas are practicing social distancing. We're using really safe measures on how to give vaccines. We are screening everybody who comes in, at least to our office. We're not, our goal is to see well people or sprained ankles, things like that, or vaccines. And we're actually holding separate immunization clinics just to catch people up, because we know that an outbreak, say, of influenza in a couple of months, along with COVID, could be quite devastating, not just to the person who gets both infections potentially, but to our entire healthcare system, because our hospitals would be overwhelmed and we don't have enough hospital beds. But in terms of your individual risk in going to either your pediatrician's, family medicine office, your family physician, the risk is low because everybody is practicing good screening guidelines. We do ask everybody wear a mask, including children over age 2. And those are the CDC guidelines.
Thank you for that answer too, Dr. Rockwell. The next one, you mentioned it a second ago, children. Why are there so many vaccines given to infants? Can't they be delayed or given later in life?
I don't hear that as much anymore from my patients, but some still follow some of these misguided recommendations from 10 or 20 years ago. So we give so many because we have so many, because we're able to protect children from so many additional vaccine preventable diseases. Like when I was a kid, it was just a handful of vaccines growing up. Since then, I've received the others. But with our children now getting 5, we can go 6 vaccines in a setting, I think parents are naturally worried. Nobody likes to see their child cry or get hurt or get pain. But if you understand the science behind it, the antigen, that's something in the environment, in a germ, something that your body gets exposed to and has to mount a response to. There's antigens in the dirt. If you get strep throat, for instance, that mounts about 50 antigens or so in your body. So the antigens from all the shots a kid might get in one setting, literally hundreds, thousands less than the antigens I got as a kid from one shot, because our technology is so good. So I did write this stat down because I thought I might be asked this. In an average day, a child going about its business who is not sick is exposed to 2,000 to 6,000 antigens per day. So every day from birth, the child is mounting immune responses to all these different antigens that they're being exposed to. And if a child goes in for, say, a 2-month well child check where there's DTaP, IPV, hepatitis B, Hib, and rotavirus, that is actually 50 antigens total. So you can see that you are not overwhelming your child's immune system by giving all the shots in one day. There is no reason to divide them up, delay them. And in fact, you actually could put your child more at risk, because all the data we have and all the studies we have showing how these shots work together in unison is based on the schedule that the CDC puts out. And it's based on your children getting all those shots on those days. So if you start giving a shot 2 months later and one more shot 2 months after that, we don't have the data to know how they work. We assume they work as well, and we hope they do, but the data that we have is based on the schedule put out. There is data showing, though, if you divide up all these shots when they're infants into like just every month or every 2 months or whatever you decide between you and your healthcare giver, there's data showing it's more psychologically harmful to the child, that every time they go into the doctor's office, they're getting a shot. And it's really nice to sometimes have a well child visit and it's not a shot time, and that they don't have to think that every time they see me, they're going to get a painful shot.
Thank you. That's a fantastic point there too. The next one, and I really appreciate you were jumping all over the map with questions. Why do we need a flu vaccine every year? Is it risky to go get a flu vaccine this year?
Okay. Why we need a new one every year is because the influenza, the flu virus, it does mutate every year. And there's something called the Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere parts of the world where scientists are studying the flu germ every year. So when flu shots come out and recommended for us in the US, it's based on what the scientists have been seeing for the last 6-9 months prior. So they make their best guesstimate, their best scientific estimate on what should go into that flu vaccine. So for instance, this year's flu vaccine just has 2 little minor changes. Might be 3, I'm not 100%. It's either 2 or 3 little minor changes to the various influenza A, influenza B portions of the flu vaccine. And that is in anticipation that we are now going to have the best influenza shot for the influenza that's going to hit our country here in the next month, 2 or 3, that it's coming. So that's why we need a new one every year. Furthermore, children, if you're not familiar, children under 8, for the first time they get a flu vaccine, they need 2 shots to sort of be vaccinated. And then after that, it's annual. But children and some older adults, your immunity wanes, and especially for the flu in the antibodies you've produced against the vaccine. So it is very important to get one every year to maintain that immunity. Even if it's the exact same flu virus the following year, then you got the shot the year before, you should still get another flu vaccine. So that's, I think, the first part of the question. Second part, I think, was, is it safe or dangerous to get it with COVID? Opposite. It is ever so important to get a flu vaccine this year with a pandemic for COVID-19. I couldn't be more passionate about this. My fear is that if we have even a regular flu year, not to mention what if it's a severe influenza year, and we have COVID still going on, and we will still have COVID going on, that not only what it can do individually, person to person, like I mentioned, if you are so unlucky to be exposed to both influenza and COVID-19 and be sick at the same time, but our healthcare system cannot absorb that, because every year, and I do inpatient medicine at the University of Michigan, every year during flu season, we have a higher number of beds full of people from influenza and the other effects that come from influenza.
So this is a double risk to yourself. I mean, you don't want to get COVID-19. You certainly don't want to get it whilst also having flu. And then it's an additional burden to the health system, which may be stretched.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Dr. Rockwell. Is the flu vaccine less effective in people over 65?
So, well, okay, in general, it is very sad for those of us over 50 and not yet over 60, but your immune system wanes with every year in your older years of life. And so by definition, if you're 65, you have less of an ability to mount a good immune response when you're exposed to a germ. So if you look at a regular, like the traditional flu vaccine, we now have data to show that the high dose flu vaccine it's been around for several years now, is more effective for people over 65. But given the option of no flu vaccine and the sort of the regular standard flu vaccine, if that's it, you should recommend to older folks to get the standard one if there aren't enough doses of the high dose around.
Thank you for that one. We have another big question for you. If COVID is worse than flu and we need a flu vaccine every year, will we need a COVID vaccine every year? And then the second part, and I can read those both to you again, will overcrowded hospitals and mass death from COVID be a reality even with a vaccine?
Okay.
So I can read the first one for you if you'd like.
You could, okay.
If COVID is worse than flu and we need a flu vaccine every year, will we need a COVID vaccine every year?
Okay, I think that is still unknown because we don't, this is, okay, the way it's a novel corona vaccine, novel meaning it's new. We have never seen this particular virus. And so we don't know if it's going to mutate like a traditional influenza A and B virus does. So theoretically, that could be possible if it's a mutating coronavirus. So don't know. What was the second part?
The second part was about overcrowded hospitals. Will death from COVID be a reality even with a vaccine?
I think yes, unless and until we have herd immunity. So herd immunity is when enough of the population is vaccinated so that the folks who are not vaccinated, including immunocompromised people who can't get vaccinated maybe, or people on chemo because of cancer treatment, they can't get vaccines. Herd immunity means if you stood in a room with 100 people, if enough people had immunity from, say, COVID, then the few people left that never got a vaccine or never had the disease would be protected because their chances of getting the disease are so low. So until we get herd immunity, I think, yes, COVID is still going to confer a lot of morbidity, mortality on, unfortunately, high-risk people. And the list of high-risk people keeps sort of growing a little bit. We know it's older people. We know it's immunocompromised people. We now know body mass indexes made the list. If you're over a body mass index of 30 and diabetes, like normal, regular people that might have well-controlled diabetes. And so it is scary, and it's not really clear why some people really get this inflammatory response that you might be reading about. The research is just active and ongoing, and we learn more, seems like daily, weekly, about this disease.
And that's why I appreciate you coming on here, because this is a moving target. We are learning more things. So I definitely appreciate you answering these questions right now. Next question up. Why are some vaccines good for decades or life, while others you need boosters, or you need them every year, like for flu?
So for flu, I think that's different in that the virus actually mutates. So you need a newly designed vaccine every year. Other diseases and the vaccines that prevent them confer different amounts of immunity and sort of a defense system in the body, and that can just sort of wane over time. And so that's why a booster shot is needed. For instance, like children go through all their childhood vaccines, and then tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis, that's the Tdap if people are familiar with that term. There's a booster when they, go to kindergarten time, then there's a booster in adolescence. And then as an adult, we're all supposed to get a booster every 10 years for tetanus and diphtheria, just to maintain our immunity. So to maintain your immunity.
Thank you for that. The next question up, can you get the flu from the flu vaccine?
No, no. No, you cannot. It's in an inactive form of influenza in the flu vaccine, in the shot. You cannot get sick from it. But here's a scenario. Let's say you got exposed to influenza the day before, or the day you went into your doctor's office or pharmacy for your flu shot, or you got exposed to influenza a couple of days, even a week after, because it takes a couple of weeks for your body to actually mount an adequate response to a vaccine. So if you were exposed to influenza either just before or just after getting a flu shot, you'll get the flu and then you'll blame your shot. But statistically, that happens enough times, and then people talk to each other, people go on social media, but the science shows no, you cannot get the flu from the flu vaccine.
Thank you. I think that's incredibly important because, like you say, it sounds like people do blame that on the shot when you've explained it perfectly well just there. Thank you. Are vaccines still made inside chicken eggs? And that leads to the broader question, what is in a vaccine?
So yes, some still are, like influenza is made in a chicken egg. There's other ways to make vaccines as well. I know that looking at like the COVID vaccines, these are not being developed in chicken eggs, hence the ability to go much quicker in development of the vaccine. But what's in a vaccine besides either a weakened or a sort of fake form of the virus or a portion of the virus or bacteria or a toxoid that the bacteria produces. So it's not the actual infecting germ, but it's either a weakened, attenuated form, or it's an imposter form that looks just like it. So it makes your body think that you've been exposed to a particular germ, and your body mounts an immune response. Now, sometimes there are little additives called excipients that help to like boost the power of the vaccine, and adjuvant, something maybe to help preserve the vaccine. You don't want mold in your vaccine to grow in the bottle or in the laboratory. Very, very minute, tiny amounts that are closely monitored for safety. And I think like that's another concern with patients about all the additives being added. If you really drill down and look at the food you eat and look at the ingredients, I challenge you to tell me you're not having additives every single day in your diet. Your body can handle that, and these are safe and necessary additives to the vaccine.
Thank you. I feel like every question is a really important answers coming back. Thank you for this, Dr. Rockwell. So we've talked about the importance of getting the flu shot. When should we get flu shots this year?
CDC usually gives a recommendation when to start. This year, they're recommending as soon as you can. That's how serious this pandemic is. And although we are in a bit of a bubble right now in Ann Arbor, you cannot let your guard down. All it's going to take is a few people visiting our town who either have COVID or don't know they have COVID. So get your flu shot as soon as it's available. Not available yet. Pharmaceutical companies have vowed to increase the amount and of flu vaccine available to us in the US. I know at the University of Michigan, we have put out a higher order for more numbers of vaccines, anticipating that more people may need it. At least we're going to try to encourage more people to vaccinate this year. So as soon as it comes out, I'm hoping August, end of August, maybe early September.
Thank you. Another important answer there. The next question that we have up, we've got a viewer question. After 3 years of getting my flu shot, I had a very bad allergic reaction. Because it was a delayed reaction, I was informed that I couldn't be tested to figure out what it was that set me off and that we would never know. And no, I'm not allergic to eggs. How are COVID vaccine makers considering possible allergies and reactions?
They are adhering to very strict protocols for monitoring all their volunteers. For instance, the one trial I'm aware of that's in phase 3, which means that there are patient volunteers who are getting vaccinated right now. That's the Moderna vaccine. They are keeping close contact with them. They are asking for reporting, and the government actually has VAERS, VAERS, a reporting system for any potential side effects you think might be a side effect. Sometimes we think things are side effects and they're not. It's just it's a coincidence in time that you got your vaccine and then you had this symptom. That doesn't really mean that is a causal effect, but they want to hear everything. There is no like silly entry into VAERS. So they are keeping close monitoring, and I do feel very confident that the risk of not giving it 110% towards safety for this particular vaccine is so big, not just for the US, for the world. This is a world global pandemic that it's super scary to me.
Thank you for that. The next question that we have up, and this flows on quite nicely, what is the current status of the search for a vaccine against COVID-19? Is it using the same level of scrutiny about safety that applies to other vaccines? I feel like you touched on that in your earlier answer, but let's repeat that.
Yes, so there was actually a Zoom sort of urgent ACIP meeting just a couple weeks ago, or a week ago. Time is very different right now. It might have just been a week ago, where we all attended via Zoom, mainly about the COVID vaccine progress. And data was presented, and I can't ever remember so much safety data being stressed and re-stressed, because I think the word needs to get out that safety is very much paramount in putting together these vaccines. You know, they're asking for 30,000 volunteers from across the country for this one particular study, and it's in 89 different areas. Now, Ann Arbor is not one of the areas, but that doesn't mean somebody from Ann Arbor can't be a volunteer. But I'm not sure I'm answering your whole question, and I got off track a little bit. What was?
No, it was really just about the safety of the COVID vaccine. So I think we answered that one. We can move on to our next one. How long will the COVID vaccine stay protective if it works? No one knows, but do I need to know before trying it?
I don't think you need to know. I think that's your best defense against this disease, is to get the vaccine if it's available. Those studies have to take time, because they have to study folks who got the vaccine for years to know. And that's part of what makes a vaccine trial go so long before it gets to the public. Here, what's being, nothing's done more quickly in terms of the initial part of formulating these vaccines, because the way they're making these vaccines is not growing in chicken eggs. So you kind of take away a lot of that time of growing things in culture. And then they're not using animal models for as long of time as before, and they're going to the human models a little bit quicker, at least for this one. But all the safety protocols are still in effect, and we just won't know until years elapse if we're going to need a booster, or if the vaccine is one and done or two and done. It looks like it's going to be a 2-shot series.
Thank you for that as well, Dr. Rockwell. We've touched on this, definitely worth reiterating. We have a flu vaccine and still plenty of flu. How will COVID be different?
In terms of COVID vaccine or COVID infection?
I think that question was about COVID infection.
Yeah. So the COVID infection and flu, okay, if you get your flu vaccine and you either don't get the flu or you get a milder version of the flu, then you will be better able to mount a better immune response against COVID if you were to be infected with COVID.
Thank you for that. This is another one that you've dipped into this a little bit. Why are there rival vaccine candidates for COVID-19? Which will work best?
Time will tell.
It's hard for you to tell, right?
Yes, time will tell there. But the rival, I think, is more different techniques of the ways that they're developing the vaccine, and that could depend on who the scientists are that are already working at a particular company, or who's collaborating, who's funding. For COVID, it's a mass collaboration between government, private, philanthropic. I mean, a lot of monies are going towards this, and everybody's working together. But time will tell which one may be working better than the other.
Thank you for that. The next one, this is an interesting one, and I think it's about fear and people's reluctance to get the vaccine. If too many people are afraid to get this vaccine, and an insufficient percentage of the population get it, is the vaccine doomed to fail from the start?
The vaccine will still work for those who got it, so good for them. It will fail to give herd immunity, and then it will only be time. This virus is quite infectious. Now, it's not as infectious as measles, which is one of the most infectious viruses we know about right now, but it's more infectious than the flu, it seems like. And so if, say, 50% of the US population gets vaccinated, 50% of those folks will be protected, but the virus will live on. And we will still be confronted with people in the hospital who didn't get the vaccine, who then get very sick. And so I can't predict how long it'll take then for the population to get sick and then have immunity.
Thank you for that. That's a tricky question to answer with all the variables right now. If someone doesn't have a high risk of dying from COVID, for instance, children, why should they take the risk of getting the COVID vaccine once it's approved?
Okay. Well, that's assuming there's a risk to the vaccine,
Sure,
which
sure.
I would argue that wouldn't be a risk. But more and more data is coming out about children. We know there have been young children who have died from COVID, but it looks like the vast majority of very young children don't get very sick. However, depending on how old they are, they can be a vector to grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, aunt, uncle, everybody. So it stands to reason we need to get our population immune to this virus, to protect each other. And so children, going off to school, it is difficult to keep kids apart, but we have to just have better measures to keep those kids from coming home and infecting all the adults in the neighborhood.
Thank you for that. The next question that we have up, how will this new vaccine be administered to the entire population?
With difficulty. It will actually be prioritized under what they call like a rolling immunization protocol. So at least as far as the CDC recommendations it will be those who are the most high risk. So it would be frontline healthcare workers and people with very high risk medical conditions. That would sort of be the top layer. And then it gets very tricky, like, well, your postal mail carrier, where do they fall in the high risk? Yes, they're high risk. They deal with the public and people working at grocery stores. So it gets really, sticky to try to figure out who, and then who's going to be at the bottom. It looks like it would be healthy children because they're the least at risk personally. So it will be prioritized based on risk.
Thank you for that one too. The next question that we have up on our list, if someone is not able to be vaccinated against flu or COVID for a clear medical reason, does that make it more important for the people who live with them to get the vaccine?
Yes, it does. It really does. So if somebody, say, is so immunocompromised they can't be vaccinated, it is utmost important that their surrounding family members and friends be vaccinated to protect them.
Yeah, and you know what? For all of the COVID-19 live streams we've done, this is a theme that it isn't just about you personally; it's about the community. We did a very, some of your answers are very similar to the COVID-19 mask wearing one that we did too. So very, very interesting. Thank you for that. The next question up. If one country has a successful COVID-19 immunization program, will immigration or travel be limited from countries that don't?
Well, that would be a political policy decision, but I can
Sure.
imagine that we're, as U.S. citizens, not allowed to travel to too many places right now because our infection rate is so high. So I don't know if that'll translate into vaccination. I think it will be dependent on infection rate, but without vaccination, without people doing what it takes to get our rates down, I guess the answer is yes.
No, and I really appreciate you for answering all these different questions, which are not only all over the map, lots of different topics. We're getting you to comment on political policy and things like that. But the questions keep on coming in, and we appreciate you. The first one up next is, who approves vaccines? Is it the FDA?
So traditionally, yes, FDA approves vaccines. Then the research and the data is all presented to the ACIP. That's where I come in as the advisory committee on immunization practices. Then there's a 15-member voting panel that makes a decision and votes whether this vaccine should be recommended to the American public. And then that gets transmitted to the head of the CDC, the director of the CDC, and then it sort of becomes the recommendation. And the way it stands now, in my understanding of the Affordable Care Act, ensures that if the CDC recommends a vaccine, then insurances are obligated to cover that cost. Of course, that's getting off track a little bit, but the point is the FDA is looking at safety monitoring, and then the ACIP is giving sort of recommendations based on efficacy, how well it works, how much it costs, is it worth it? Are the side effects tolerable? Things like that.
Thank you. The next question that we have up, this is another one that you've touched on a little bit further back, but it bears repeating, and it's always nice to get people answers when they push questions to us. When do you think a vaccine for COVID-19 will be ready?
Okay, so personally,
yes.
I think that there is a good chance that Dr. Fauci is correct, because he's a very smart man, that it may be ready by the end of this year. But that doesn't mean it's ready for me to get. Since I do work in the hospital with patients, I might get it before the average person when it kind of trickles down to me as a healthcare worker. But I'm not in the ICU and I'm not a respiratory specialist, so I wouldn't be the first line even of the healthcare workers who are getting that. So I think what I'm sort of in my head thinking about, it's going to be a good year from now before it will become more available.
Thank you for that. Next question we have up. How often does a virus mutate, and how quickly would that make an impact on the vaccine?
I don't know the answer to that, how often a virus mutates or what might cause that mutation. And what impact would it have? I'm not sure, but I think that if it was a slight mutation, it might make a vaccine less effective, but maybe not totally ineffective. But that is now getting out of my wheelhouse of expertise.
Sure,
and
indeed.
You need an immunologist there.
Fantastic. Now, the next question we have up, you mentioned Dr. Fauci just a few moments ago. Recently, Dr. Fauci has claimed that it is bad medicine to look at results that are not randomized control studies. In the upcoming release of a fast-tracked COVID-19 vaccine, will there be randomized control studies about the safety and efficacy of the new fast-tracked vaccine? Will trial participants be tested for presence of virus and/or antibodies before and during the trials?
I do know about this trial. Everybody gets tested before they ever receive the first vaccine to make sure they haven't been exposed or they don't have COVID. And then as the trial is going on, anybody with symptoms will be quickly tested to see if they have been exposed to the virus. And then their blood will be tested to see what kind of an antibody response they mount.
Thank you for that. We are 2/3 of the way through our chat and the questions are rolling in. And I thank you for taking all of these different questions. Another one we've touched on a little bit. How will we know what will be the safest COVID vaccine based on trials and testing?
To be honest, I don't know that we're going to have that many choices in the beginning of vaccines that are available. But the safety data, I feel confident that when a vaccine gets presented to the public, it will be safe. safety data then it continues for decades with any vaccine. That always is ongoing. So it's a rolling process.
Yeah, thank you. That's important to mention too. What metrics will be looked at to determine if we have reached enough herd immunity to no longer need social distancing measures after vaccination for COVID-19, or do we not know yet?
Well, what I've read is it's about a little over 70% of the population has to have immunity, and you can sort of either have had, if the vaccine's available, or maybe that many people in the US have already had the disease and have antibodies present in a blood sample. So that kind of data, I can imagine, would take a little bit of organization nationally to collate in a reasonable way. Of course, every state health department and every local health department in the state, they keep track and data. It's just getting it all together. And that's where the CDC comes in, because they are world renowned for infection prevention and monitoring and putting out statistics like that.
Thank you for that too. The next question that we have up: if someone has had an allergic reaction to a past flu shot but isn't allergic to eggs, will they be able to get the COVID vaccine?
So I guess I would need to know more about what is, defined as an allergic reaction. And by the way, the old, are you allergic to eggs question is not so important anymore for flu vaccines, because we realize that even if you've had anaphylaxis, which is a very severe allergic reaction where your throat swells and you might need epinephrine or go to the emergency room, that doesn't preclude you from getting a flu vaccine anymore. The recommendation is, though, you get your flu vaccine in the presence of somebody who might be able to administer aid if you were to have a super rare anaphylactic reaction. But it was more theoretical, that risk, and now we know that risk is really not high there. But so that's that. But the coronavirus vaccine would be so different from a flu vaccine in terms of how it's made and how it's developed, that I don't think you would even need to worry about having a reaction to a flu shot and then think about the COVID vaccine.
Thank you for that. The next one, I promise I didn't actually ask this question. If someone is coming to the US from the United Kingdom and then going back to the UK, is there any difference in the flu vaccines between the two countries? And if so, do they need to get vaccinated in both locations?
That is a good question. No, we're getting the same flu vaccine. Now, if you were going to Australia, that might be a different sort of variation of the flu vaccine. But then again, their seasons are opposite ours too, in terms of their flu season. So as far as I know, there aren't any different recommendations for people in travel and the flu vaccine. You just get the flu vaccine as recommended from your country of origin.
Yeah, that's how I've operated before. I'm hopping over there all the time. Next question up: are there ways for people to boost their immune systems besides vaccines?
Yeah, absolutely. There are ways to be healthier and have a better and healthier immune system, but that cannot be confused with boosting your immune system to better fight off a novel coronavirus. There is nobody on this earth who has any immunity to the coronavirus. We haven't been presented with it. Now, some of us can be sort of stronger and more able to fight it off. The older I get in medicine, the more I'm convinced it is what you eat, how much you exercise, and how much stress you can kind of relieve. And in this day and age, this is tough. We're all not out and about as much, and hopefully we're eating healthy, but stress is high. But those kinds of things can definitely help. And when it comes to COVID-19, there's data showing that if you're low on vitamin D, you may not do as well as somebody who has adequate amounts of vitamin D in their body if you're exposed to COVID-19. And vitamin D kind of got to be like a sexy thing to check about 10 years ago or so. But you may not know it, but I mean, vitamin D is added to milk. And so that, traditionally kids are drinking more milk. A lot of adults lose the ability to digest milk, so they're not drinking milk. But Vitamin D helps prevent rickets for little kids. And so decades ago, kids were getting rickets because they didn't have enough vitamin D. Well, our main source as Americans of vitamin D is actually the sun. But you don't want to be in the sun a lot because then there's skin cancer problems. So we live in Michigan. We don't have enough sun 12 months a year to even give us enough vitamin D. So I recommend all my patients to think about 1,000 to 2,000 international units of vitamin D every day normally. Now with COVID, I'm stressing it more just in case they're low, because if you are deficient in vitamin D, we actually have prescription strengths. And I don't want everybody to go out to their doctor and demand a vitamin D test after this, but it's so simple to just get vitamin D. It's safe. It's a fat soluble vitamin. So you want to take it after eating and not on an empty stomach to get optimal absorption. And it's possible to get toxic on vitamin D to take too much. But the only person in 25 years of medicine I've ever seen even close to toxic levels had been taking large amounts of vitamin D every day for years that I couldn't even imagine doing. So if you kind of think about a rounded out number, 10,000 international units a week, it's a little over 1,000 a day. You can take it once a week after a big meal, and you should be good for coverage there. If there's any questions about you have maybe an endocrine problem or you have some sort of metabolism issue that vitamin D may not, you talk to your doctor. Obviously, don't just start swallowing a bunch of vitamin D. But if you're a general healthy person and you don't drink milk and you're not out in the sun because you're working or you're on Zoom all the time on your meetings, then you should probably supplement with some vitamin D.
Fantastic. And then just to circle back, vitamin D and those other methods for boosting your immune system, you said earlier, this is by no means a replacement for a vaccine. No means a replacement.
I mean, I did hear the other day from one of my patients when I offered the Shingrix, the new shingles vaccine. It's not even new anymore, but the shingles vaccine now readily available because the supply finally caught up with the demand. It's the shingles vaccine for folks over age 50. And when I recommended it, no, thanks, doc. I'm healthy. I said, that doesn't have anything to do with it. Have you known anybody who's had shingles? It could be really painful. So, I mean, I didn't push it. I usually get a little more persuasive with patients about vaccines that they're refusing, but I also know shingles is not going to likely be causing her death if she were to get shingles, but it could really cause a lot of pain and suffering that could go on.
Yeah, thank you for that. The next question up. Some people may have heard of the SARS or MERS viruses, which are also coronaviruses. Do we have vaccines against them? And if not, why not?
So there are a lot of coronaviruses, and that's the common cold is caused by coronavirus. Why not? Well, no one's ever been successful in making a coronavirus vaccine. They got pretty close, if not all the way to SARS, but then the need for that sort of died down a little bit. Viruses are just tough and tricky. These coronaviruses, they're wily. Like they form these little spike proteins, and the way they, I guess, cause infection is a little more difficult to get a vaccine against, but I am very pleasantly surprised by the progress made for the COVID-19 vaccine progress to date, because they're figuring it out so fast. They've got scientists all over the world. This is what they're doing 24/7 working on. So I think we're about to get our first coronavirus vaccine.
Thank you for that. The next question up, we are headed into our last 10 minutes. I think we can squeeze in some questions. How can we be assured a vaccine sped through the channels of research will be safe in such a short time frame?
Well, there's gonna have to be an element of trust that part of what's making this speedier, the process, is there is so much money being thrown at it that it's allowing it to go faster that way. They are not compromising on any of the safety measures in how they've already tested it, and now they're testing it in humans. And so a part of it's going to have to be trust in science and trust your doctor who's recommending it, I guess.
Absolutely. Here's another question. Will better treatments for COVID be available before a vaccine?
I hope so. I was working in the hospital in April in the height of our COVID-19 cases here in Ann Arbor, and it was very, very scary because we didn't have like anything known to be helpful treatment wise. And now since then, I'm going back in a week or two, we do have some treatments that have been shown to reduce your chance of dying, reduce your chance of going into the ICU and getting intubated. So that's great. And it's just research. It's just time, and it's just research to figure that out. So it could be we get more treatments, but is there going to be a magic bullet that says, aha, you have corona, I'm going to give you this pill and it's going to go away like penicillin takes away strep throat? I highly doubt that.
Thank you for that, Dr. Rockwell. If someone has an autoimmune disease, are vaccines as effective for them?
So yes, they are. And as a matter of fact, if you have an autoimmune disease, you should be vaccinated because you don't want to get the vaccine preventable disease. But then you should talk to your doctor. Some people are on very sort of potent immunocompromising drugs to keep their own disease down. You're the person who needs everybody else to get vaccinated so that you don't get infected.
The next question that we have up, do we know yet if you can get COVID more than once?
I didn't look that one specifically up. I have read of a couple of cases where people had COVID, tested negative a few times, and then got COVID again. There are so many nuances though, because there's false positives,
Absolutely.
false negatives, and our testing, is still getting refined. So I'm not sure. I guess my answer is I'm not sure.
Absolutely, and that's a perfectly fine answer as well. Here's a question for you, Dr. Rockwell. How do you counsel someone who feels they have had serious reactions to vaccines in the past and are worried about getting a flu vaccine? And how will you counsel them for the COVID vaccine?
Okay, well, I guess I would have to find out what a serious reaction is. There are various forms of these mild reactions, anywhere from a sore arm to maybe feeling a little feverish or flu-like for a day or two. Now, that doesn't mean you have the flu, but I don't know I've ever met a patient who had a severe reaction to vaccines in general, because like I said, you're getting exposed to thousands of antigens per day just by living. And the amount of exposure from a shot of a foreign substance is 1/1000th of that. So, I guess I'd just try to educate my patient better and give him all the information I can, because the CDC has wonderful sort of patient education sites. And then when it comes to COVID, I think what I'm hearing mostly is the fear factor that it's coming, it's so quickly, the vaccine is being developed so quickly. But I have the benefit of going to the ACIP meetings. Used to be in person, which was exciting at the CDC. Now it's Zoom. But I feel it's amazing how much research is being done and how much safety is being looked at. That is always the case when it comes to vaccines, though. So I find it very easy to try to persuade patients that vaccines are safe. But when it comes to COVID, I don't feel like it's going to be any less safe than any both of my children, they are adults, they're in their 20s. Unbeknownst to me, have signed up to be volunteers for the COVID-19 vaccine. So we'll see if they get chosen, and I can have firsthand information there.
Thank you for that. Another question for you: when do you expect the COVID-19 second wave?
My fear is that we may here in Michigan have a second wave as flu season hits. So October, November is my concern. But I think we can prevent that if we continue. I think, we've done a pretty good job here in Michigan of, for the most part, most people wearing masks and keeping socially distanced, and our numbers initially were terrible, and now they've sort of maintained. And I think if we can continue that, we can avoid a second wave. I'm just fearful people will get complacent. All the undergrads are coming back into town. So we have to just keep reminding people to follow the rules.
Thank you for that. We are headed into our last few minutes. Let's try and squeeze in as many questions as we can. And then I know there's a couple of things you wanted to mention at the end too. The next question up, can you discuss T-cell immunity and how the standard cold viruses may lead to inherent immunity against COVID, or at least reduced symptoms, and what impact that would have on coverage needed for herd immunity?
Okay, that one is pretty tricky, and that is above my pay grade, but there's T-cell and B-cell immunity, and then there's memory cells, and the first wave of your immune system that gets sort of activated by a new germ. Doesn't matter what it is, but then your immune system gets activated, then your body forms antibodies, and then some memory cells and T cells coming from lymphocytes, things like that. It gets really complicated. But from what I understand, having the flu, the actual flu, if you had the disease in year one, you're not immune from the flu year two, because it's going to mutate a little bit. So I feel like that question is asking if having immunity against influenza will then give you some immunity against COVID. I think it's an interesting question, but to my knowledge, that's not true.
Thank you for that. Let's move into our last two questions. So our penultimate question, what level of safety is needed since this is such a dangerous virus? What level of side effects will the FDA and others accept before approving a COVID vaccine?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer. I think that I don't know what level of, but okay, I don't think they're going to allow a vaccine that would be put out that would cause harm. But when you're saying safety, it might be like a higher amount of side effects, meaning a sore arm, or you have the chills or something for a day and you don't feel as well because your immune system's boosted. But I don't think the FDA will approve this if there's any harm that's being put on the patient.
Sure, that's very important to state. The next question, this is another good one. Older adults are often told to wait until September or October before getting their flu shot, so it won't lose potency by late winter or spring. Is that the case this year?
That is not the case this year because of COVID-19. So the recommendation is to get your flu vaccine earlier. Just to avoid the potential hazard of having both infections at the same time.
Absolutely. And then I know there's a couple of things I wanted to remind you about. First, the PBS documentary. Could you talk about that for a second?
So Immunization Action Coalition is a nonprofit family medicine run with CDC guidance. It's a website, and it's good for physicians and other vaccine providers because it offers like an Ask the Experts column for just any question you have of the experts in vaccine science, but it also gives you all the up-to-date information on vaccines. But Deborah Wexler, who founded this organization, just celebrated 30 years. And there is a documentary that was just made, and it's soon to go to PBS, but it was released today on their website. And I think, Ed, you can give folks that website. It's about 50 minutes, and it's a great documentary about vaccines, about vaccine safety, about why we vaccinate. And it also touches upon like anti-vaccine sentiments in this country and how to address that.
So we'll push that in the comments section. I also wanted to ask you about the I Vaccinate campaign.
I Vaccinate campaign is a state of Michigan campaign through the MDHHS, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. And it originally just came out to promote vaccinations towards new moms, which is kind of sexist, but it was promoting to moms to vaccinate your babies. And so that's how all the marketing went out. But it has been very successful to improve immunization rates, or at least improve education and knowledge. And they have a lot of free information you can get off their website, and it's iVaccinate.
Fantastic. Well, that wraps up all our questions, and there certainly were a lot of them on a variety of topics. So I really appreciate you. I appreciate all our viewers and all those questions coming in. Again, have a look at the links. We'll be posting links to certain things that Dr. Rockell mentioned. If you didn't catch all of this, you can catch it on all our major Michigan Medicine social media channels. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to our expert, Dr. Rockell. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, everybody, for listening.